The sun was a killer over the plains of Wyoming. It was the summer of 1880, and the heat shimmered over ground so cracked and dry, it looked like the face of an old man who'd forgotten how to smile. In the town of Cedar Ridge, tumbleweeds rolled down a main street made of stubborn grit and weathered wood. The buildings all leaned on each other, tired of standing alone against the wind. Margaret Sullivan walked right down the middle of that street. Her daughter's hand was a small, hot weight in her own. Her calico dress was faded, torn, and patched. Her boots kicked up little clouds of dust with every step, and every step felt heavier than the one before. 4-year-old Emma struggled to keep up. Her cheeks were streaked with dirt and tears, her golden hair a tangled mess under a worn bonnet. They had been walking for days. Margaret's stomach had been a hot, empty knot for weeks, but every last scrap of jerky, every last crumb of hard bread she'd given to Emma. The child's shoes, a gift from a church box miles back, were falling apart, held together by strips of Margaret's own petticoat. "Mama, I'm tired," Emma whimpered, her voice a tiny thing against the big empty wind. "I know, sweet pea. Just a little further," Margaret whispered back, though the words felt like sandpaper in her throat. She'd said those words in every town, a prayer she wasn't sure anyone was listening to. The general store owner didn't even look up, said he had no work for a woman with a child. The saloon owner just laughed. The hotel keeper worried the child would disturb his guests. Door after door, shut in her face. By noon, Emma was swaying, a dead weight in Margaret's arms. They were at the edge of town, where the street dissolved back into empty land. And there, standing alone, was one last chance. A sprawling ranch, its fences strong, its house sturdy. A sign by the gate read, J.S. Stone, Rocking S. Ranch. Margaret knew the name. The whispers in town had painted a picture of Jake Stone, a man made of hardship, a bitter soul, quick to anger and slow to mercy, hollowed out by a tragedy years ago. But Margaret was out of choices. With Emma limp in her arms, she pushed open the gate and knocked on the heavy oak door. It swung open, and the man who stood there was as hard and unforgiving as the land itself. Jake Stone filled the doorway, all broad shoulders and towering height. His face was worn, his dark hair shot with gray. But it was his eyes that stopped her breath. They were storm gray, cold and unreadable. "Whatever you're selling, I ain't buying," he growled, already moving to close the door. "Please," Margaret's voice cracked. "I'm not selling anything. I need work. Any kind. I can cook, clean, mend. I'll work for just food and a place to sleep. The barn would be fine." She gestured with her head to the child in her arms. "My little girl. She hasn't eaten in 2 days." Jake's eyes hardened. "I don't hire women, and I don't want the trouble that comes with children. Move along." "We've nowhere else to go," she begged, her knees about to give way. "Please, just a chance." "The answer is no," he snapped. "Now get off my land." But just as he said it, Emma collapsed. Her small body just crumpled onto the porch. Margaret cried out, falling to her knees beside her. "Emma, baby, stay with me." The child's breathing was a shallow, rattling sound in the still, hot air. For a long moment, Jake Stone just stood there, frozen. His storm-gray eyes flickered with something he had buried long ago, a memory, a wound. Then with a curse, he moved. "Pumps around back," he said gruffly. "Get her water, then leave." Margaret tried to lift her daughter, but her own strength was gone. She stumbled, and a pair of strong hands caught her. "Fool woman," Jake muttered, but the venom was gone from his voice. With a surprising gentleness, he took Emma from her arms. The little girl weighed nothing. Her head lolled against his broad chest. Her eyes fluttered open. She looked right up at him, and with the simple innocence of a child too weak to be afraid, she whispered, "Mr. has kind eyes." And she reached up one small, dirty hand and touched his cheek. Jake Stone went absolutely still. It was as if that tiny touch had cracked the stone around his heart. His jaw worked, but no words came out. Instead, he turned and carried her inside. The house was more fortress than home. The walls were bare where pictures should have been. Dust coated the mantel, except for one spot, where a single picture frame was turned to face the wall. He set Emma gently on a worn leather settee. He brought water, then bread and milk. Margaret knelt by her daughter's side, watching her drink, relief washing over her in a dizzying wave. Jake stood back, arms crossed, his eyes never leaving the child. He was trying to be hard, trying to hold on to the coldness that had been his only companion for years. But with every small, contented sigh Emma made, his mask slipped. When the child's hand reached out again, her small fingers wrapping around his large one as she drifted off to sleep, Jake Stone found he couldn't pull away. The walls he'd built around his heart were trembling, shaken by the fragile weight of a stranger's child. And for the first time in a long, long time, he didn't feel completely alone. That night, the rocking S Ranch was no longer silent. Margaret sat by the fire, watching Emma sleep on the settee. Jake paced the room, a restless wolf in a cage, pretending not to watch the steady rise and fall of the child's chest. "She'll be all right now," Margaret whispered, more to herself than to him. Jake just grunted. "One night, in the morning, you're gone." Margaret bowed her head. "Yes, sir. Thank you." But as she moved to carry Emma out to the lean-to, Jake's voice stopped her. "Too cold out there for a sick child. She can stay here, just for tonight." Margaret's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them away. "You're very kind." "Kindness has nothing to do with it," he snapped. "Just don't want a dead child on my conscience." But later, when Emma whimpered in her sleep, it was Jake who knelt beside her, his calloused hand hovering just over her hair. He froze, caught, caught between the man he had become and the father he used to be. He pulled his hand back like he'd been burned, muttered something about needing air, and stalked out into the cold darkness. The days that followed fell into a strange, uneasy rhythm. Margaret was up before the sun, mending the fox-ravaged chicken coop, tending the horses. Jake gave her tasks in short, clipped commands. Mend the fence, weed the garden. But his eyes were always watching Emma as she played nearby. Emma got her strength back fast. Soon her laughter was ringing across the ranch yard, and every time it did, Jake's face would harden. But his eyes held a longing he couldn't hide. Margaret worked without complaint. She coaxed vegetables from the dead soil. She swept the dust from the porch. She put a jar of wildflowers by the door. Small touches of life. Jake grumbled about it, but he never threw them out. One morning she handed him a basket of fresh eggs. "The hens are laying again." He looked at them, then at her. "You've got away with them." Margaret offered a small smile. "I suppose they just needed someone to care." His jaw tightened. He turned and walked away without another word, as if her simple sentence had struck a nerve he kept carefully hidden. 3 weeks later, he hitched the wagon. Time for the monthly supply run. "I can go," Margaret offered. "Just make a list." "No," he cut her off. "You'll come with me. Best get it over with." The ride to Cedar Ridge was tense. Margaret smoothed her worn dress, tried to tame Emma's wild curls, but she knew what they looked like. A widow and her child living on charity. The whispers started the moment they stepped down. Curtains twitched, heads turned. In the general store, a woman with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue made sure her voice carried. "Well, Mr. Stone, how unusual. We heard you'd taken in strays." "I've hired help for the ranch," Jake growled, slamming a tin of coffee on the counter. "That's all anyone needs to know." But the gossip followed them. At the feed store, 2 ranch hands snickered. "Looks like Stone's finally got himself a woman. Wonder how she's paying for her room and board." Jake's knuckles went white on the wagon reins. He looked ready to tear the men apart. But then Emma tugged on his sleeve. "Mr. Jake, why are those men saying mean things?" He looked down at her, and something inside him seemed to break. His whole face softened. "Because some folks, little one, have got nothing better to do than flap their gums. You pay them no mind." The ride home was quieter. That evening, Margaret found her voice. "I'm sorry for today, for what they said." Jake was cleaning his rifle, his movements sharp and precise. "Folks have always talked. The question is, do you mean to stay, knowing they'll keep talking?" Her heart jumped. "If you'll have us, yes. Emma's happy here." He was silent for a long time. Then he nodded. "Winter's coming. It's not easy up here." "We've nowhere else to go," she said simply. His eyes flickered with something that looked like relief. "There's a spare room in the house. Better than the lean-to when the snow hits. Take it." "Thank you, Jake." "Just practical," he muttered. That night, Margaret tucked Emma into a real bed for the first time in months. She heard Jake's heavy footsteps pause outside the door. He just stood there for a long moment, a silent guardian in the darkness. And for the first time, Margaret dared to hope they had found a home. But peace on the frontier is a fragile thing, and it never lasts. One evening in late October, three hard-faced men rode up to the ranch. Outlaws, you could tell by the way they sat their horses, the way their eyes took everything in. Margaret's blood ran cold. She sent Emma to her room and stepped onto the porch. "Can I help you?" The leader, a man with a jagged scar across his brow, gave her a smile that was all teeth. "Well now, looks like old Jake's got himself some pretty new help." He started to dismount. "Mr. Stone isn't here," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "You can wait by the barn." "Maybe our business is with you," the man drawled, stepping closer. His hand shot out and grabbed her arm, his grip like iron. Then a voice cut through the twilight like a whip crack. "The lady asked you to let her go." Jake sat on his horse at the far end of the yard, his rifle leveled, the setting sun at his back turning him into a figure of pure fire and judgment. The outlaws froze. "Now, Stone," Scarface drawled, letting go of Margaret. "Just a friendly visit." "Get off my land," Jake's voice was dangerously quiet. "We ain't done nothing wrong," another one spat. The sound of Jake chambering around was the only answer. Scarface gave another rotten smile. "All right, we'll go. But you mark my words, Stone. A man shouldn't keep things he can't protect." They rode off, slow and deliberate, a promise of violence hanging in the air. Jake dismounted, his face a grim mask. "Did they hurt you?" "No, just frightened me." His jaw clenched. "Pack your things, you and Emma. I'm taking you to town tonight. You'll be on the morning stage." Margaret stared at him. "What?" "You heard me. They'll be back. This is my fight, not yours." "We are not leaving," she said, her own voice trembling but fierce. "Woman, you don't understand. I understand that if we run, they'll see you as weak, and if you send us away, you'll be proving them right." "I don't care what they think," he thundered. "Then what do you care about?" she shot back. The question broke him. The anger in his face crumbled, revealing the raw grief beneath. "I couldn't protect them," he choked out. "Sarah and Thomas, my wife and my son. I was in town when the raiders came. I found them when I got back." The pain in his voice was a physical thing. "And now I've put you and Emma in their place." "That wasn't your fault, Jake." "Wasn't it?" His voice cracked. "I should have been here." She stepped closer, her heart aching for him. "You've given us safety. You've given us hope. Don't throw that away because you're afraid." Their eyes locked, and the air between them crackled with something more than anger. Then a small voice from the doorway shattered the moment. "Mama? Mr. Jake? Is everything okay?" Jake's whole body seemed to deflate. He knelt, his voice suddenly gentle. "It's fine, little one. They're gone now." Emma patted over and patted his cheek. "Don't worry, Mr. Jake. Mama's real brave. She knows how to shoot." Jake's head snapped up, his gaze locking on Margaret, an eyebrow raised in a silent question. She flushed. "My late husband taught me. It's been a while. Can you hit what you're aiming at? More often than not." He stood up slowly, a decision hardening his face. "All right, we stay, but we do it my way." The days that followed were a blur of preparation. Jake taught her how to handle his rifle, his hands briefly brushing hers, sending a jolt through her she wasn't prepared for. She was a quick learner. At night, he showed her the arsenal hidden beneath the floorboards of the barn. Rifles, pistols, boxes of ammunition. "Men like that, they're cowards," he said. "They'll come at night. We'll be ready." The attack came on a moonless night, 5 men creeping out of the darkness. Margaret, on watch, gave the signal. Gunfire erupted. The night was a chaotic storm of muzzle flashes and shouting. Margaret fired from the kitchen window, her hands steady, her heart a cold, hard knot in her chest. She saw one of the outlaws fall. When the dawn finally came, two bodies lay in the yard. The rest had fled. Jake came back to the house, a bloody gash on his arm, his face grim. Margaret ran to him. "Are you hurt?" "Not my blood," he said. "We held them off." And for the first time, he pulled her into a hug, his arms wrapping around her with a desperate strength. "You fought like hell, Margaret, like a partner." Tears stung her eyes. "I told you, we stand together." Winter came down hard. Jake's arm, injured in the fight, got infected. A fever took him. For 3 days, Margaret nursed him, forcing broth and whiskey between his lips, her own fear a constant prayer. Emma hovered nearby, a tiny, solemn nurse. One night, as the wind screamed outside, Jake grabbed her hand, his eyes wild with fever. "Don't leave me, Sarah," he whispered. Margaret froze. Sarah, his late wife. Her heart twisted, but she squeezed his hand back. "I won't," she promised. "I'm right here." When the fever finally broke, something between them had changed. The wall of his grief had cracked. Spring brought a different kind of trouble. Scarface returned, this time with a dozen men. They came to burn the ranch to the ground. But this time, Jake and Margaret weren't alone. Just as the outlaws charged, a volley of rifle fire erupted from the ridge. The neighbors, the very men who had once whispered and sneered, now riding to their aid. The fight was short and brutal. Jake ended it with a single clean shot that took Scarface through the heart. In the aftermath, as the neighbors helped round up the survivors, Margaret swayed, the adrenaline leaving her weak. Jake caught her, his arms strong around her waist. "You saved us," he said, his voice hoarse. "You saved us first," she whispered back. Emma ran to them, grabbing both their hands. "We're a family now, aren't we?" Jake's throat worked. He looked at Margaret, at the fierce, loyal woman who had stood by him, who had fought beside him. He looked at the child who had chipped away the stone around his heart. "Yes," he said, the word finally coming out, clear and true. "We are." Weeks later, the small church in Cedar Ridge was filled with wildflowers. Jake stood at the altar, his scarred hands trembling slightly. Margaret walked down the aisle in a simple blue dress, with Emma scattering petals at her feet. When the vows were spoken, Jake's voice was thick with emotion. "With this ring, I give you not just my name, but my heart, my promise to stand beside you, always." Margaret's tears fell. "And I give you mine, not behind you, but beside you, as your partner." Later, as dust settled over the ranch, they sat on the porch. Emma was nestled between them, pointing at the first stars. "Look," she whispered, "they're shining just for us, because we're a real family now." Margaret leaned her head on Jake's shoulder. "We were a family before. Now the world just knows it too." Jake looked down at her, and in his storm-gray eyes the clouds had finally parted. He kissed her temple. "Home," he said, his voice low. "That's what you gave me." Just as he spoke, he caught sight of the old picture frame on the mantel, still turned to the wall. He had never moved it, never had the courage. He stood up, walked over to it, and slowly, for the first time in years, turned it around. Margaret gasped. The woman in the photograph, the woman with the kind, sad eyes and a hint of a smile, was his late wife, Sarah, and she was Margaret's identical twin. The world stopped. The woman in the photograph was not just similar to Margaret. She was identical. The same high cheekbones, the same shape of the eyes, the same stubborn set to her chin. It was like looking at her own reflection in a dusty, time-worn mirror. Jake's hand trembled as he held the frame. "Her name was Sarah," he whispered, his voice thick with a grief so old it was part of his bones. "She was my wife." Margaret couldn't speak. Her mind was a whirlwind of confusion. It was impossible. A coincidence of this magnitude didn't happen. Not in this world. "When you first knocked on my door," Jake continued, his eyes lost in the past, "I thought I was seeing a ghost. I thought the grief had finally broken my mind." He looked at her, his expression a mixture of awe and pain. "That's why I was so hard on you. I was trying to convince myself you weren't real." Emma, who had followed them inside, looked from the photograph to Margaret. She looks like you, Mama. I, I don't understand, Margaret stammered. I never had a sister. I was an only child. Are you sure? Jake asked gently. The question hung in the air. Was she sure? Her parents had died when she was young. She'd been raised by an aunt who rarely spoke of the past. There were no photographs, no family heirlooms, just a handful of vague, half-formed memories. A lullaby she couldn't place, a recurring dream of two identical swings in a garden. My parents, she began slowly, they died in a fire, in a town called Willow Creek. I was just a baby. Jake's face went white. Willow Creek? He breathed. The raiders, the ones who took Sarah and Thomas, that happened near Willow Creek. The pieces began to fall into place, sharp and painful. The fire, the raid, two separate tragedies, years apart, yet somehow connected. Scarface, Jake said, the name a curse on his lips. The man who led the raid on my family. He was the same man who came here for you. He must have recognized you. He must have thought that I was Sarah, Margaret finished, her voice a horrified whisper. He didn't come back for revenge on you, Jake. He came back to finish a job he thought he'd completed years ago. He came back to kill the woman who had escaped him. It was all clear now. The outlaw's cryptic threat. A man shouldn't keep things he can't protect. They weren't talking about the ranch. They were talking about her. She looked at the photograph again, at the face of the sister she never knew she had. A woman whose life had been stolen by the same violence that had almost claimed her own. And in a final heartbreaking twist of fate, it was her ghost, her mirror image, that had led Margaret to this place, to this man, to this family. Tears streamed down her face, not of sorrow, but of a strange, profound sense of destiny. Jake stepped forward and took her hand. I don't know what the heavens were thinking, sending you to my door, he said, his voice rough with emotion. But I think Sarah sent you. She knew I needed someone. She knew Emma needed a mother. Margaret looked from the face in the frame to the man standing before her. She was not a ghost. She was not a replacement. She was Margaret, and her journey, full of pain and loss, had brought her here. Home. She squeezed his hand. Maybe we both needed saving, Jake Stone. He pulled her into his arms, and this time, there were no ghosts between them. Just the solid, certain warmth of two people who had found each other across a divide of time and tragedy. The past was a part of their story, but it would no longer define their future. Under the endless Wyoming sky, a cowboy who had lost his family, a widow who had found hers, and a little girl who had dreamed them all together finally had a story of their own to tell. If you enjoyed this story of love, loss, and the incredible twists of fate, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. We've got plenty more tales from the wild heart of the West, where second chances are hard-earned and love is the most valuable claim of all. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from tonight. We'd love to hear from you.